The morning had barely started when I stepped outside, coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, ready to take on the day. But the sight that greeted me stopped me in my tracks, an empty driveway where my car had been parked the night before. A cold realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My car was gone. Confusion quickly turned to panic as I scanned the street, hoping I had somehow misplaced a whole vehicle overnight. But no, there was no sign of it. That's when my neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, shuffled over from his porch, his eyes filled with sympathy. "They towed it," he said with a sigh, shaking his head. My grip on the coffee cup tightened. "Who?" "The HOA," he muttered, disgust evident in his tone. "That new woman, Karen, said your car was an eyesore and had it towed this morning." An eyesore? My car was a spotless, well-maintained sedan, legally parked in my own driveway. My blood started to boil. I knew the HOA could be a nuisance, but this was pure abuse of power. Without wasting a second, I stormed inside, grabbed my keys, and jumped into my spare vehicle. I needed answers. By the time I reached the towing lot, my frustration had morphed into a controlled fury. The attendant barely glanced at me as he leaned lazily against the counter. "Yeah, we got a silver sedan towed in this morning," he said, scrolling on his phone. "That'll be $500 to release it." My jaw clenched. $500? For a car that was legally parked. He shrugged. "Talk to your HOA. They ordered the tow." Oh, I would. But first, I needed my car back. I grudgingly swiped my card, seething as the payment processed. A few minutes later, my car was returned to me, sitting in the lot like a hostage finally freed. As I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, an idea sparked in my mind, a way to ensure this never happened again. Karen and the HOA had made a powerful enemy today. They just didn't know it yet. I drove home with my grip still tight on the steering wheel, my mind whirling with thoughts of revenge. The HOA had crossed a line. A simple fine or warning would have been one thing, but an outright tow? That was pure power tripping. And the fact that they thought they could get away with it made my blood boil even more. By the time I parked in my driveway, I had made up my mind, I wasn't going to let this go. I needed to figure out exactly what loophole they had used to justify towing my legally parked car. So, I did what any rational homeowner would do when dealing with an out-of-control HOA. I dug up their own rulebook. The HOA's bylaws were a dense mess of bureaucratic nonsense, but after an hour of reading, I found the clause they had used against me. Apparently, there was a vague rule about unsightly vehicles that allowed the HOA board to tow cars deemed to be in violation. The problem? Nowhere did it specify what counted as unsightly. That meant Karen had used her own biased judgment to single me out. I was fuming, but I knew that anger alone wouldn't win this battle. If I wanted real revenge, I needed leverage. That's when I started looking into HOA finances. I spent the next few days scouring public records and speaking with a few neighbors who were equally fed up with the way the HOA was run. I learned that Karen had recently pushed through an increase in HOA fees, allegedly for neighborhood improvements. But there was one problem: no one could point to any actual improvements. Where was the money going? One of my neighbors, Lisa, had been keeping track of the HOA's financial reports, and when I asked her for a copy, she handed it over with a knowing smirk. "About time someone did something about them," she said. I took the documents home and pored over them. It didn't take long before I found something suspicious. There were thousands of dollars in expenses listed under vague categories like administrative costs and community enhancements, but no details on what those actually were. Even more suspicious, Karen had recently pushed through a budget increase for office space maintenance. That was strange because the HOA didn't have an office, they held meetings in the community center. Unless... I kept digging and found out that Karen had leased an office space in her own name, then charged the HOA for it. Essentially, she was funneling community money into her own pocket. A slow grin spread across my face. I had them. Not only had Karen illegally towed my car, but she had been using HOA funds for personal gain. And now, I was going to turn the tables on her in the most satisfying way possible. But first, I needed to buy something very specific, something that would ensure my revenge would be absolute. The more I thought about Karen's scam, the clearer my plan became. I wasn't just going to expose her, I was going to take control of the very thing she used to wield her power. The first step was simple: find out exactly where the HOA's so-called office was located. Public records showed it was in a small commercial building about 10 minutes from the neighborhood. When I drove by, I nearly laughed. It wasn't much, just a modest single-story unit, but the fact that Karen had been scamming people to pay rent for this place made it all the more satisfying. Now, I needed to find out if it was for sale. A few phone calls later, I had my answer. The owner was looking to offload the entire building. Apparently, the HOA was its only tenant, and the owner was tired of dealing with their late payments and constant complaints. The best part? The asking price wasn't even that high. I had the money to buy it. And I was going to. But before making any moves, I needed to secure my leverage. If Karen tried to fight back, I had to make sure she had no way out. So, I gathered every piece of evidence of her financial misconduct. I compiled the suspicious budget reports, highlighted the discrepancies, and even pulled copies of meeting notes where she had pushed for higher HOA fees. Then, I drafted a formal complaint to the state's HOA Oversight Board. Once everything was in place, I made the call to the building's owner. "I'd like to buy the property," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And I can pay in cash." 2 weeks later, the deal was done. The ink was dry, and the building, including the office Karen had been scamming the HOA to lease, was officially mine. Now came the best part. I walked into the office unannounced, holding my newly signed ownership documents. Karen was sitting behind a desk, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware that her reign was about to end. She looked up, frowning. "You can't just barge in here. Do you have an appointment?" I smirked and placed the documents on her desk. "No appointment needed, Karen. You're in my building." Her eyes flickered to the papers, and I watched as the color drained from her face. This is a joke," she stammered. "There's no way you—" "Oh, but I did." I leaned in slightly. "You see, Karen, while you were busy scamming the HOA, I was busy buying the very ground you stand on." She grabbed the papers with shaking hands, skimming through them desperately. When she reached the official property deed with my name on it, her jaw clenched. "What do you want?" she finally spat, trying to regain her composure. I smiled. "Simple. You have 30 days to vacate. The HOA no longer has an office." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I turned and walked toward the door, but before leaving, I glanced over my shoulder. "Oh, and Karen? I sent a formal complaint to the state board. They'll be investigating your financial records soon. Have a great day." With that, I walked out, leaving her to face the consequences of her own greed. And I wasn't done yet. Karen was cornered, but I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. People like her never do. The very next day, she sent a neighborhood-wide email, dripping with fake concern. "Dear valued homeowners, it has come to my attention that some individuals are attempting to disrupt the stability of our beloved HOA. Rest assured, I am working tirelessly to ensure your community remains protected from reckless changes that could threaten property values. In the meantime, please note that HOA operations will continue as usual. Sincerely, Karen J. Thompson, HOA President." I nearly laughed when I read it. It was her last desperate attempt to act like she still had power. But I had just begun to tighten the noose. First, I forwarded her email, along with my official purchase documents, to every homeowner. I kept my message short and factual. "Dear neighbors, I wanted to clarify that as of last week, the property housing the HOA office is under new ownership, mine. The HOA has been given 30 days to vacate the premises. Any claims to the contrary are false. Additionally, an official complaint regarding financial mismanagement has been submitted to the state's HOA Oversight Board. Expect further updates soon. Best. My name." It didn't take long for the community to react. Some people were confused, others were furious, but not at me. The cracks in Karen's authority were widening. Then came phase 2 of my plan. Since I now owned the HOA's office building, I had full access to their rental agreement, and let's just say, the terms weren't exactly favorable for Karen. The lease contract required the HOA to maintain proper financial standing to continue renting the space. With my recent complaint to the state board and the investigation now underway, their finances were being scrutinized. Any misuse of funds? Immediate grounds for termination. All I had to do was submit the right documents to the property manager, and boom, the lease was officially voided. With that, I sent Karen her final notice. Karen, per the terms of your lease agreement, and due to ongoing investigations into financial misconduct, the HOA's rental contract is officially terminated. You and any associated HNA personnel have 14 days to vacate the premises. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Sincerely, your new landlord. For 2 days, she said nothing. But I knew she was scrambling. Then, on the third day, I received a furious, barely coherent email from her. This is an abuse of power. You cannot simply take over and throw the HOA out. This community needs me. I will be contacting my lawyer immediately to dispute this. I responded with one line. Feel free. But as of now, you're trespassing. And just to make things sweeter, I attached an official notice to vacate letter from my lawyer. She was out of moves. But the final blow? That was still to come. Karen was drowning, and she knew it. For days, she tried to keep up the illusion of control. She sent more emails, all filled with vague threats about legal action. She called emergency HOA meetings, though fewer and fewer homeowners bothered to show up. I even heard she tried to convince the property management company that I had acquired the building illegally. That conversation must have been fun for them. But I had the upper hand, and she knew it. With the eviction deadline approaching, I decided to give Karen a final shove. I hired a local contractor to inspect the HOA office. It was an old building, one that had been neglected for years, thanks, ironically, to the HOA's mismanagement of funds. It didn't take long for the contractor to find several code violations serious enough to warrant immediate repairs or force a shutdown. Armed with that report, I sent Karen my next and final email. Subject: Official eviction notice, immediate action required. Karen, it has come to my attention that the HOA office is in violation of multiple safety and zoning codes. As the legal owner of this building, I am left with no choice but to shut down operations until necessary repairs are completed. Given that the HOA's lease has already been terminated, I suggest you begin vacating the premises immediately. A formal complaint has also been submitted to the county office regarding mismanagement of HOA funds. Expect to hear from them soon. This is your final warning. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Sincerely, your new landlord. I hit send and leaned back in my chair. Karen's response came just 4 hours later. It wasn't an email this time, it was a public meltdown. She stormed into the HOA office that afternoon, screeching at the few remaining board members. She ranted about how this was illegal, how I was a fraud, and how she wouldn't be bullied out of her own community. Too bad for her, most of the board members had already turned on her. They were tired of the lawsuits, the scrutiny, and most importantly, they were scared of what the financial investigation might uncover. They voted to disband the HNA that same night. I wasn't there when Karen received the news, but I heard from a neighbor that she went completely silent for several seconds. Then, without another word, she grabbed her things, walked out of the office, and never set foot inside again. 2 days later, she was gone. She didn't even wait for the official eviction deadline. She packed up, sold her house at a loss, and left town. Some say she moved to another state, others claim she's trying to start a new HMA elsewhere. Honestly, I don't care. All I know is that my neighborhood is finally free. No more fines, no more ridiculous rules, no more power-hungry HOA board. And the best part? The building I now owned, the former HOA office, was now my personal workspace. I turned it into a community center, offering free meeting spaces and events for neighbors. No HNA. No fees. Just a place for people to come together, the way a real community should be. Karen thought she could control everything. She thought she could bend the rules to her will. But in the end, she learned the hard way. Mess with the wrong person, and you just might lose everything. And I made sure she did. Karen wasn't one to go down without a fight. Even after my eviction notice, even after the financial investigation started looming over her head, she still believed she could claw her way out of this mess. I had backed her into a corner, but instead of accepting her fate, she came out swinging. Her next move? A desperate attempt to rally the remaining homeowners against me. It started with a petition. One morning, a neatly folded letter was slipped under my door. When I picked it up and opened it, I nearly laughed out loud. Petition to remove unauthorized landlordship. It was some nonsense about how I had unlawfully acquired the HOA building, how my actions were detrimental to the community, and how the neighborhood demanded justice. It was signed by exactly 4 people. 4. Out of the dozens of homeowners in the community, only 4 signatures. One of them was Karen's. Another was her best friend, a woman named Patricia, who had been running the HOA's events committee, which mostly involved charging people extra fees for things nobody wanted. The other 2 were people I barely even recognized. Clearly, Karen's grip on power was slipping. But that didn't stop her from trying again. When the petition failed, she moved on to spreading rumors. She started telling people I was planning to triple their HOA fees, which made no sense, since the HOA was already being dismantled. She claimed I was planning to sell the office space to developers who would turn it into a noisy shopping plaza. She even tried to convince people I had bribed the county officials to approve the sale. It was pathetic. But it was also annoying. For the next few days, I had to deal with concerned neighbors stopping me on the sidewalk, asking me if I was really planning to turn their quiet street into a corporate nightmare. I had to explain over and over that Karen was lying, that she was just a desperate woman grasping at straws. Some believed me right away. Others took a little more convincing. So, I decided to shut her down completely. That weekend, I organized a community meeting, one without Karen or any of her cronies. I sent out flyers to every household, inviting them to gather outside the former HOA office so we could discuss the future of the neighborhood. I wanted them to hear the truth directly from me. And when the night of the meeting arrived, the turnout was massive. People brought lawn chairs. Families sat on picnic blankets. Someone even set up a snack table with homemade lemonade. It was like a neighborhood block party, without the HOA breathing down our necks. I stood up in front of them, cleared my throat, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. All right, let's get one thing straight, Karen is lying to you. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people nodded. Others looked surprised. But I had their attention. I did not bribe anyone, I continued. I did not break any laws. And I am not turning this place into a shopping plaza. Then I pulled out the official documents, the ones proving that the HOA's office sale was completely legal and that Karen had misused thousands of dollars in HOA funds. Gasps echoed through the crowd. A few people muttered angrily under their breath. That was when I hit them with the final blow. As of next month, I said, this neighborhood will no longer be under HOA control. Silence. Then, cheers. Actual, genuine cheers. People clapped. Some even hugged each other. I saw one guy literally toss his HOA violation notices into the air like confetti. Karen's reign was over, and they couldn't be happier about it. But Karen? She wasn't done yet. Even as the neighborhood celebrated her downfall, she was still lurking in the shadows, planning something. Something big. Something that could ruin everything. Karen was cornered. Her power over the neighborhood was crumbling, her lies were exposed, and the community had turned against her. But instead of backing down, she did what truly desperate people do, she went nuclear. It started with a lawsuit. A letter arrived at my doorstep, stamped with legal insignia. Karen was suing me for unlawful acquisition of community property, intentional defamation, and public harassment. She was trying to argue that my purchase of the HOA building was fraudulent and that I had coerced the county officials into approving it. It was complete nonsense. But it was also annoying. Fighting a lawsuit, even a weak one, takes time and money. Karen knew she had no real case, but she was hoping that dragging me into legal battles would drain my resources and force me to give up. She had no idea who she was messing with. I immediately hired a lawyer, someone sharp, aggressive, and ruthless, the kind of attorney who ate HOA cases for breakfast. He took one look at Karen's complaint, let out a short laugh, and said, "This won't last a month." And he was right. By the time we reached the first hearing, the judge barely let Karen finish her argument before tossing the case out. "This lawsuit is frivolous," the judge said. "You are wasting this court's time." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Because Karen wasn't working alone. That night, just as I was locking up my house, I saw Patricia, Karen's right-hand woman, standing in my driveway, holding a thick envelope. She had the look of someone who was about to do something really stupid. "What do you want?" I asked. She stepped forward, lowering her voice. I'm giving you one last chance, she whispered. Reverse the HMA shutdown. Give Karen back her position. Drop the entire thing, and we'll leave you alone. I almost laughed. Are you serious? She nodded. Then, she held out the envelope. I took it, opened it, and felt my stomach twist. Inside was a fake document claiming I had forged the purchase agreement for the HOA office. It had a bunch of legal jargon and fake signatures, trying to make it look like I had bribed my way into buying the building. And at the bottom? A note from Karen herself. Give it all back, or this goes public. They were trying to blackmail me. I looked up at Patricia, keeping my face neutral. This is illegal, I said. You know that, right? Her lips twitched. So is fraud. I took a deep breath. I could have lost my temper. I could have thrown the envelope in her face. But instead, I smiled. Because I had already won. Patricia had no idea that I had recorded our entire conversation. My security cameras, positioned right above my garage, had caught every word. I crossed my arms. Tell Karen I'll think about it. Patricia looked satisfied. Smart choice. Then she walked away, completely unaware that she had just sealed Karen's fate. Because by the next morning, I had sent the recording directly to my lawyer. And Karen's downfall was about to be complete. Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. By attempting to blackmail me, she had given me the one thing I needed to bury her forever: solid evidence. I wasted no time. By the next morning, I was sitting in my lawyer's office with the recording of Patricia's threats and the fake documents they had tried to use against me. My lawyer listened carefully, then leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a smirk. They really thought this would work, he said. This isn't just blackmail, it's criminal fraud. You have them cornered. I grinned. So what's our next move? He tapped his fingers on his desk. We're taking this straight to the county prosecutor. Karen and her little HOA goons are about to have a very bad day. I loved the sound of that. It didn't take long for the legal system to respond. Within a week, Karen and Patricia were served with official charges. The county had reviewed the evidence, and both women were facing criminal fraud, attempted extortion, and falsifying legal documents. That's when the real fun began. As soon as the news spread through the neighborhood, the HOA board members, who had been blindly supporting Karen, panicked. One by one, they started resigning. They wanted nothing to do with Karen's mess. And the few who stayed? They turned against her the moment they realized they could be held liable for HOA corruption. Karen, of course, tried to play the victim. This is a witch hunt, she screamed at reporters outside her house. I was just protecting the neighborhood. But the evidence was undeniable. The court had the recording of Patricia threatening me. The fake documents were analyzed and confirmed as forgeries. Even some of Karen's former allies testified against her to avoid getting dragged into the charges. It was over. Karen was found guilty on multiple counts. Patricia took a plea deal in exchange for testifying against her. The HNA was officially dissolved. And Karen? She lost everything. Her position, her influence, her reputation, all gone. But the best part? She was kicked out of the neighborhood. You see, when I bought the HMA's office building, I also gained access to their property records. And guess what? Karen had been violating HOA rules for years. Illegal property modifications. Unapproved backyard structures. Violating noise ordinances. All of it had been covered up because she was in charge. But now? Now she had no power. So I did exactly what she had done to me. I reported her violations to the county. And without her HMA to protect her, she was hit with so many fines that she was forced to sell her house. By the end of the year, Karen was gone. And the neighborhood? We finally had peace. One evening, a few months later, I was sitting in my front yard, watching my newly parked car in my driveway, the same car that Karen had once towed. A few neighbors were having a small barbecue party at the house next door, laughing and celebrating the fact that the HNA was officially dead. Patricia had left town. Karen was disgraced. And me? I had just sold the old HOA office building, for double the price I bought it for. As I sat back, sipping my drink, I heard a neighbor chuckle. You really did it, he said. You took down the most corrupt HMA in the city. I smiled. I told you, I said. Nobody messes with my car.